Hello, everybody, and welcome to Behind the Camera. Here we are with episode 126 of Behind the Camera. As always, before we get into today's show, if you would like to support the podcast, you can follow me on social media using the link in the description, which will take you to all platforms and also includes the link to my book, Behind the Camera, The Journey So Far, which you can get in paperback, ebook, and free to read on Kindle Unlimited. But now, getting straight into today's conversation. Today's guest is holistic wellness coach, Kerisma Vere. Her approach to coaching is shaped by her own lived experiences with a focus on healing, regulation, and sustainable growth. We spend a lot of time talking about self-compassion, why being overly critical can hold you back, and how you can start nurturing a healthier relationship with yourself. For me, this was a really refreshing conversation because everybody goes through something, whether they talk about it or not. And I think this episode is an important reminder of that. My hope is that after listening, you feel encouraged to take those first steps towards being kinder to yourself and less self-critical. But now, here's the interview. Kerisma, welcome to Behind the Camera podcast. It is an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. How are we doing today?
We're doing pretty good, Andy. Thank you for having me.
That is my pleasure. So you are a holistic wellness coach and author. Take us back through your journey. Like what has led you into what path has taken you to being a holistic wellness coach and then subsequently an author with your books?
Wow. Okay. Well, do we have about 5 hours?
As long as you would like to take, honestly.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I was actually doing coaching, and it was kind of like packaged up in like weight loss coaching, but it was really about helping people. Sort of the way that they were approaching change, really. Most of the women I worked with were very hard on themselves and were really stuck in those paradigms of, fail, give up, be hard on yourself. So I don't know how much weight I have helped anybody lose, but I definitely helped every single person I worked with develop like a little bit kinder, more compassionate relationship towards themselves, right? So I was kind of cluing in right there that, like, hey, this is where I'm shining. But yeah, I guess in 2014, I was probably like really kind of at the what I thought was the top of my game. I was happily married, and I had some good friends. I was 14 years clean. I had lost 80 pounds through healthy lifestyle changes. I'd become a vegan. I even learned how to run. Oh my God, I had become one of those running people. I could run for an hour at a time, and I had a thriving coaching business, and I had done a lot of work on the trauma in my past, and I kind of thought, oh, here's this. I'm finally getting to enjoy life. Like I've arrived, and things are going to be good from here. And my spirituality was also really tied up in the fact that like because I'm doing all the right things will continue to go well, right? And that's not what happened. So I actually started to get unwell, and I didn't notice the dissociation that I wasn't even aware of was wearing off, and I was starting to see a lot of things in my world through the lens of when I was much younger and I was living in a very traumatic environment. And unaware of that, it just started to have more and more impact because there was a heightened sensitivity in me towards thing, right? So I was perceiving rejection, and I was perceiving all these different things to be happening, whether or not they were happening. I mean, they were happening in some cases, and in some cases they weren't, but a lot of things happened, and I did what I've always done, which is, like you get knocked down, you get back up, get knocked down, you get back up. Well, there was about a 2 to 3 year period of time where that happened just repeatedly to the point where things got, and I couldn't get back up, and I was really, really unwell. I just mentally, my PTSD was off the charts, and all of the trauma had come back and flooded me, and I'd lost pretty much everybody in my life. I'd had to stop coaching because ethically I wasn't in a place to do it anymore. I had relapsed on cigarettes, and that kind of put an end to on a cardio and cigarettes just don't mix. You can do it, but it's it's not a wonderful relationship, and Yeah, so everything fell apart, and I got brought to my knees, and I also relapsed at the time because that was the only way I knew really how to make it through. Because I'd had a history of where drugs and alcohol had actually kept me alive when I was younger, so I turned back to that, and then it was a slow climb. It was a very slow build. I got lucky. I got some really good help, not right away. Oh my goodness. I was in the hospital and other places and not getting the help I needed whatsoever, which actually exasperated the situation for quite a while. But eventually I got connected to good help, and eventually I started to be able to rebuild and yeah, I had to learn a lot about being in relationship with myself. I had to switch from a sense of self-worth that was really all about you know, in before I got unwell, it was about like I was loving myself because I was so successful, and because look at me, I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that, and I got this going on, and it was all about like success and everything I was doing. So of course, when I got sick and all of that stuff like just went down the tube, my sense of self and self worth just went down the tube with it, And to me, that was such a betrayal because I had thought that I had, worked on that for 25 years, and I had thought that I had a really solid foundation of that, and I learned like really the hard way that I didn't. That it was all still very very conditional.
Yeah.
So I started picking up the pieces, and I didn't have anything to offer anybody for many years, to be honest. My everything had to go into just me, trying to feed myself. Like I had severe amnesia as a result of the breakdown that I had, and I was living in a panic attack for 2 years, and severe depression, and all kinds of clinical diagnoses, and I just kept working on it. So everything in the book, and everything I coach and everything I believe passionately is stuff I've lived through, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, okay, which, allows me to kind of meet people pretty much anywhere. There's if I haven't lived through it, I at least can have some compassion for it because I've lived through some pretty difficult things, right? So, and I understand what it's like to try to create change, meaningful change from a place where like literally brushing your teeth once a month is, like how do you give yourself credit for that in a society where we shame ourselves and there's these standards and expectations? How do you move out of the type of mindset that just comes down, slams you so hard for every single day you didn't do it, to be able to give yourself credit for that one day that you did do it? Because when you do that, it starts to change the direction of things, right?
Mhm.
And you start to be able to build on that, and the frequency moves up, and this is how, this is so much what I've learned about change is really learning to look at my own life, learning to look at the things that I'm doing, and to really acknowledge them and validate them, to have like unconditional love for myself, so that my sense of self it's an intrinsic self-worth, right? Like right now, before I lose the weight, before I like get my degree that I'm going for, before I finish a good podcast, before I do anything, I'm lovable right here, right now in this moment, And then the things that I do, they're because I want to. They're based in my values. They're based in, my kind of my wise mind of what I think might be best for me,
Yeah.
and they become about choice, not about this pressured I have to be good enough, or I have to make my life good enough. It already is, and I get to kind of like actually enjoy my life in the moment before I get anywhere I might want to go, right? Which is, I think, the ideal.
Yeah, for sure. And like, I think, going off the back of what you're saying, like a lot of people who struggle with, themselves and their self worth, like one of the sort of easiest things for people to turn to is comparison, and compare themselves with other people. And it ties back to like the point you made about like the being in such a judgmental society that really kind of hammers down like particular standards on where you should be at a particular point, or what you should be doing, or anything like that. But like, everybody's situation is so different. Nobody really knows what anybody else has been through and how difficult, like, I mean, I think anybody who's kind of like suffered like any form of like even depression as like that the baseline of that is having the days where you just physically can't get out of bed.
Yeah.
But they're just the days, right? You have people who are like that for months, for years,
Yes.
where even doing the
Yes.
simplest thing is a massive achievement. But then obviously like the next stage of that is kind of okay, how do you take the next step? And that can be equally as hard, if not harder. And then sometimes people find their way back. And I think that like there is unfortunately like a kind of ignorance that some people have who have never kind of experienced anything like that. And it's just like, well, that's the easiest thing in the world for me to do. So why can't you do it? And it's just sort of, in terms of mental health and trauma, the unfortunate thing that I kind of find from it is that it's something that a lot of people will never understand until they actually go through it themselves.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, that is true, and you're right, But the one interesting thing I find about that, Andy, is a lot of those people that seem like they have their life together. Like I was actually having a conversation with my best friend about this yesterday, and there's a spectrum of overachieving and underachieving, and depression is often like in the underachieving category, right? A
Mm-hmm.
lot of the people that end up getting depressed were actually over here at the overachieving spectrum at one
Yeah.
point and burned right out and ended up over there. So when they get better, they actually go right back over to the overachieving, right? Whereas the balance is in the middle. And what I say, I have a friend in that overachieving category right now, and I know he's taking a lot of self-esteem from it and stuff, but I go at what cost, right? Like so you're doing really, really at work. You work like 90 hours a week, and you've got this title and this car and this whatever, and it's your reason why you can't, like you have to leave the gathering early and stuff like that, but at what cost? And I would like, I would love, I'm not like the kind of scientist that takes a brain apart, but I would challenge that person is not taking care of themselves emotionally. I would challenge that they're probably avoiding things mentally, and I would challenge that there's probably like from the holistic wellness, we've got our emotional health, we've got our mental health, we've got our social health, we've got our environmental health, we've got our financial health, we've got our spiritual health. So even though some people are really highly functioning in a couple of those areas, I find that when I look closer, they are not in those other
Yeah.
areas. And they're probably not talking about it because they're actually not comfortable looking at it, right? So the person who's laying there in their bed with their covers up over their head, which was actually me for a day or so this week, is like, okay, so I'm not doing that other stuff today, but you know what? I am really responding to how I feel. I'm making room
Yeah.
for this massive grief that's coming up in my life. I'm like, so we don't, it's learning to give ourselves credit in a different, I love, on any particular day, I could end up giving myself credit for having an ice cream cone and I could give myself credit for not having an ice cream. It's all about the
Yeah.
context, right?
Absolutely.
Was it a
Yeah.
loving decision either way, right? And
Yeah.
and the same thing, I could actually say, well, you know what? That wasn't a good decision to have one, right? Or I
Mhm.
could say it wasn't a good decision to not have one. It's really about that attunement to self and getting rid of all those external metrics and making like decisions based in wise mind that are based on our internal reality, our external environment, our like our energy, our capacity, and getting in touch with our own needs to try to make the best decisions possible in the moment, right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And like, I think, having that kind of like mindfulness of these particular moments is like very important because I find sometimes that like my busiest day of the week is a Sunday. I'm
Mm.
putting out a podcast episode. I'm helping my wife tidy the house. I've got to go and do like the groceries for the week, etc. It's a very busy day, and I'm a guy who likes his rest, right? There are times I like I like having unproductive days sometimes. I'll admit that. It's fine. So it's but it this is where it kind of gets a bit like sort of the lines get a bit blurred for me, right? So I could be having a particularly bad day, and if I go and do everything I need to do in that day, I will literally congratulate myself. I'll be like, yeah, do you know what? You did it. You got through it. You did it. You could have put it off, but you didn't do it. And that's great. But then other days, other Sundays, I'll literally just be like, all right, cool. I'm going to go do this. Right. See you. And then within 2 hours, everything's done. And I don't even think twice about it. And, I think that kind of like ties into what you're saying, because it's, you, you can do the same thing.
Contextual.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's contextual.
Contextual.
I think, you kind of need to have that self-awareness in terms of how you're feeling in a particular moment. And yeah, things need to be done. And, the world does not stop just because you're having a bad day. But, you can really you can dictate the sort of speed of things around you. You can be like, right, well, you know what? It's not going to stop for me, but I'm going to just slow things down a bit. I'm going to just do this. It'll work for me. And that's going to help me, give me that push. I'll do this one little minor thing that's going to kind of just sort of give me that little push, that thing that is going to be like a bit of an achievement. And that kind of gives you the push to kind of get to that next level, to just be like, right, okay, that's fine. You did that. What's the next thing?
And we can prioritize on, like, on those days when you wake up and you're so tired, or your energy, and you can just tell, like, this is going to be a day you're going to struggle to get that stuff done. You can look at your list and you can prioritize. Okay, like, that's a commitment. I already blew it off once. It needs to happen today, right? But that I could probably actually, there'd be no harm in doing that at a later point. And and then we can look at everything that is in front of us, and then we can make these choices. If we can take the guilt and the shame and the shoulds and the other people, what they would think of this, out of it, right? Like, if you have a wife, of course you've got commitments, and so there needs to be a negotiation, right? And again, like, I will reschedule occasionally when my needs dictate it, but like, I sort of have a rule of thumb: if I need to reschedule once, but then the next time I make like a 99% effort to make sure that I follow through, so that it's not not a habit, right? But and there's lots of ways that we can be. I mean, I think some people think compassion is without accountability, right? That if I'm just nice to myself, I'll never do anything, and that's not true. I think one of the most brilliant things, and I talk a lot about it in the book too, is, like, so the critic, we're never going to get rid of the critic. The critic's there for a reason. It's got a job. It's been there. We know how to get from A to B. We've been doing it our whole lives, right? But we can say to the critic, it's like, okay, I hear you, but I've been developing this other lens, this compassionate lens. And so to me, being able to tell if I'm with the critic or the compassion it lens is like, the critic takes everything out of context, right? Like, so say I didn't go to the gym today, right? That would be like, well, you're lazy, or you're just blowing this goal, or like, you're making bad choices, or it's all of that. But the compassionate lens would come in and go, wow, you ended up later than you thought, staying up later than you thought because that stuff was going on. You had a really bad night's sleep because you were having nightmares, and then this morning you got that really upsetting phone call. So, like, I can see why you didn't go to the gym. But here's the part people often don't realize is also part of compassion. I know going to the gym is really important to you. And so we don't want to we don't want to keep putting this off. So let's look. When's the next chance that we could realistically do it? Tomorrow? Okay, so tomorrow, what if we, like, turn the phone off and go to bed a little bit earlier, right? And whatever is breaking out in the world, we can just ignore it. And we'll go to bed earlier, and we'll leave the phone off, and we'll put our gym clothes out at the edge of the bed. So when we get up in the morning, we're just going to throw them on, head to the gym, and we can deal with whatever comes afterwards, right? So that compassionate lens, it's not saying that, it's not ignoring the fact that, like, we didn't go to the gym, and it's not saying, oh, we never need to go to the gym. It's saying, like, this is important to you. I understand why you weren't able to do it, and let me help you make a plan so that you are able to do this, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like, as the critic, you're looking at things for how they appear in front of you, but in terms of compassion, it's every piece of context behind that, in terms of as to why.
Right?
Yeah, like, and I absolutely love that, because I think, as people, we're so quick to critique ourselves. Like, I know, for example, if I don't make it to the gym, I'm just like saying all kinds of all kinds of bad things about myself, and it's just, and that's been the case for 2 years running now.
So
And
let me ask you, how does that actually help you? Does it help you get there?
no, absolutely not. It's been 2 years.
It makes it a lot worse, doesn't it? Right?
Yeah, of course it does. Yeah, like
Just drains your energy, and you're not
yeah,
going.
as soon as I do that, I'm like literally the nearest piece of junk food that I can find, and
Yeah.
I think there are elements of it where, sometimes when you do that, you almost become like a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way. Like, I know for a fact I have said to myself, right, if I don't do this, I'm gonna end up like this. And then I end up like this because I don't do anything about it. I don't like have that accountability. And then I'm just like sitting there about 6 months later, like, well, I told you so. And it's just like, well, are you surprised? Are you surprised? Like, I love the point you make about accountability, because putting things off, I think is like it's like totally okay within reason. Like, obviously, if you have the means to do that, you know, but the way that it really should be looked at is you are simply just rearranging your time and your priorities, as opposed to, you know, I'll just do it tomorrow, because you need to think about, when are you going to do it tomorrow? How are you going to find time of it? You have to look at the bigger picture. You have to look at the context of what your day looks like the next day, and find somewhere to fit in what it is that you're putting off. And, you know,
Yeah,
like,
it's true.
and
Like we need. It's so funny. I just actually got out of a group assignment in school because they were in idea la la land. And I'm like, okay, I don't mind doing it your way, but create a plan. Create a
yeah,
plan for how we get from here to there within the amount of time that you want to that we need to get there, right? And it's same like with appointments that are important. I know myself, so I don't just cancel and then wait to get around to rescheduling.
yeah,
If I'm canceling something, I reschedule it right then. Right?
absolutely.
Even
Yeah.
if I have to do that several times, with some of the stuff, like it does have to be done several times. But it's just like, no, and when I'm creating my schedule, it's actually gotten quite busy with the coaching and the authoring things and the school and all the other kinds of things that I do. It's like I deliberately leave lots of pockets. I leave lots of pockets because I know that I need self-care, and I know that I'm going to need downtime, and know that I need flexibility, right? And particularly if there's those rigid ones that, like you like it's a specialist appointment, and if you don't keep it, it's going to cost you, like, a lot of money. So I don't build other rigid things around that on the same day, right?
Yeah.
The other stuff around it will be the softer stuff that's possible, depending, so that I can meet myself where I'm at and do that flexibility. I talk about dynamic balance and flexibility being tools in our toolkit, along with patience, right? Like,
Yeah.
actually being patient with yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And like, I think the scheduling thing is very important too, because you if you having an appropriate schedule for yourself in terms of, what you do, like, you obviously yourself with the coaching and, authoring, that's you looking out for yourself, looking after yourself, and making sure that you don't put yourself in a position where you're going to have to reschedule these commitments, that you're going to be that you're able to do it, that you're able to do it comfortably and healthily. And that's the same with, me as a podcaster. I do this part-time. My calendar only ever has 3 slots a day, because that's all I can do. When it gets to a point where I know I have enough to do me for a while, I will take about 3 or 4 weeks off recording. I will set my calendar to the next month. I will do whatever,
Because that's
because
it's self-care, and a lot of people don't actually understand that
yeah,
that is partly how we care for ourselves. Like all of these different things, right? Like, yes, a bubble bath or meditation or getting your toenails painted. I know you probably have that on your list of
oh
to-do
yeah,
things. Right. Those are surface level self-care, and they
mm,
absolutely matter. But
yeah,
that pedicure, the time you put aside for yourself, the intention you have for yourself, that is actually what the self-care component about that is. And building a schedule the way that you're talking about, or the way that I'm talking about, right? Like that is this the self-care. I am in recovery again for the second time, but I consider it recovery from not just substances, but from mental health, right?
Yeah,
So
of course.
I've gone back to school, and I've made sure that I have accommodations in place so that I can prioritize, because I know absolutely equivocally, if I do not make the taking care of myself on a daily basis the priority, everything else will implode. It it won't
Oh
happen
yeah,
overnight, because I'm tough and I can handle it for quite a long time, but we'll eventually implode, right? So it's just like that's and whether or not a professor has deadlines, and or they have expectations that are, most workplaces and school and all kinds of, it's so funny because they can even be teaching self-care, but they'll put these deadlines and these pressures on you that like just totally wipe out your ability to like get sleep and take care of yourself, right?
oh yeah,
So
yeah,
I laughed at some of the accommodations I put in place because they're really things that every human being needs, right? And I work with a lot of people that struggle to have a healthy relationship with food, right? Whether it's around weight loss or other kinds of things. And it's just like, to me, eating 3 times a day is self-care. That is care. It's something I need to do to care for myself. Oftentimes with mental health and stress, it's something I've skipped, right? So there's the basic feeding myself, which is so so important. And then another layer on top of that is, what am I feeding myself, right? And then that's a spectrum. So
yeah,
when I have the capacity and the energy, I try to feed myself as well as possible. And then that gets to be like kind of like a spectrum of like, okay, well, at least we're eating, right? Okay, let's just get something in us right now, right? And then but I keep that 3 times a day structure whenever possible, and then yeah, I try to make the really good choices whenever I can.
yeah.
But I allow for some of the other choices too, because they're a little bit of quality of life, like I like fish and chips, so I don't really want to live a life where I can't have fish and chips sometimes. But this is costs and consequences, right? Like this is accountability within compassion. It's like, and quality of life. It's like, yes, okay, I want there to be fish and chips in my life. If I have them every day, I'm not going to live very long. Right? It's going to have a lot of other side effect consequences to it. So maybe I'll have them once a month, right?
Mm.
Then and it's great because then when you allow that kind of freedom with yourself, whatever it is, you're not constantly rebelling against yourself, right? Like,
Yeah.
the minute you have your guard down, that other part of you is going, "Ha ha! I'm eating the whole box of cookies."
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. And like, sweet treats are my vice. Like I have a very I like to think I have a very unique relationship with food. And like thankfully I've never been in the position where like it's ever been very detrimental like to my health in terms of like, disorders or anything like that. But for me personally, it's one of those things where, I like for the last 15 years in terms of like my weight and things I've eaten, it's yo-yoed like crazy for 15 years. Like since I was 17 years old, it's just gone, and then I learned like about sort of physical exercise, things that I enjoyed doing in terms of that and everything like that. But for me, in terms of food, it's like if I'm eating well, then I will genuinely eat less because I am like content with what I'm having, even if I end up only eating once a day, right?
Yeah, yeah,
But if I'm eating junk, I cannot get enough of it. But then at the
yeah,
same time, and I know that there's positives and negatives to this. And I even went as far to me telling a mental health professional that that I couldn't ever, leave this plane because I just love food too much and I couldn't think about never having a particular meal again. And I'm just like, yeah, that's my relationship with food. It's like it's an absolute godsend for me. But there are times I might have abused it a little bit, but then when I make, but like I understand the rewards of when I really do look after myself. So it's very, very it's very strange. It's very unique. It's like
Well, I love that because it's true. It's a gift. It's like air, right? Only
yeah.
it's actually like a lot more exciting than air because
Oh God,
it
yeah.
has flavor and
Especially
smell
when
and
fish and chips exist, like I mean, but
two
I
health coaches talking about fish and chips.
like I kind of like the idea that that mental health professional had never heard that before. Like it's just like, do you still have these particular thoughts? I'm just like, no, because I had a really good dinner one day, and I don't think I could ever, go without that again. So that's that. I'm here for the long run. I don't think any walk of life, a mental health professional has ever heard that, and I like to think, and it's just, but it's
But the
like one of the,
premise is they've heard the premise because
yeah, for sure.
I actually have suicide in my history when I was about 17, right?
Hmm.
And um, I that was actually when I first turned to drugs and alcohol. I tried a week smoking pot, a week drinking, and I thought, oh, if I could just like have a lollipop and do both all day, but that it was how I was coping with
Hmm.
what all the trauma that was on in the inside. But anyway, after my first two attempts, I was a friend found out and made me promise I wouldn't do it. So, but if a little while longer, not that much longer, I had an experience. I don't remember what the experience was, but it was just a day or a moment. And I was really glad to have been there for that, right? I was really glad to have been there for that. And that stuck with me as that, like, okay, when this comes up again in your life, because it probably will, and it has, it's just like just remember that there was always that moment that came after that was worth being there for.
Yeah,
And that's what I'm hearing you say exactly. But you've associated it with a meal, right?
absolutely. Yeah, like
What is the meal? Come on,
oh,
Andy.
it's
What's the meal?
absolutely. I mean,
We want to know.
honestly, I can't remember specifically, but there. I mean, I think you can kind of really just sort of break it down in any kind of way. Like anything
Yeah.
burger related for me is always a winner.
Yeah.
So definitely up there. For some reason in my head, I have KFC. It might have been to do with KFC or fried chicken. I don't know, but it's that sort of thing. It's like those proper treat foods that, you shouldn't eat too much, but they're nice once in a while,
Yeah.
but
I,
yeah,
I actually I actually got to have one of the super fresh bun Kaiser homemade burgers at my friend's retirement party
very
on
nice.
Saturday. And it's just like, yeah, I have one of those once a year and it's just like, oh yeah, it's like straight from heaven, right?
Oh yeah, but but then it's one of those things where it's like, like there's like a weird kind of like discipline with certain things. Like I know we're talking about food a lot, but like there's a weird like discipline with
Yeah.
those sorts of things. But like I think it's like very much related to acceptance and discipline, where
Yes.
it's like
Permission, self-love, acceptance,
yeah, like
and it I think too, right? Like I mean it's your relationship to burgers is not your identity.
some might
But
argue it is, but
yeah,
I
okay,
maintain it's
but
not.
hang on. But the appreciation, the gratitude, the being able to recognize things like that, I would argue all of those things are actually like really a big part of your values, probably how you live and
Oh,
who you are as a human being, right? So I know Abe, everybody out there listening, it sounds like we're talking about burgers and fish and chips, but we're really not. We're talking about like
no.
how to be in relationship with yourself in a much more like loving, meeting yourself where you're at, compassionate kind of way. And really, like, I mean, that's the ways I showed up for my self journal. That's the, like, that's what, and I go shopping with some of my clients sometimes, right? Like, and I can see them trying to buy the things they think I think that they should buy. And I'm like, no, we're here to find the things that you want to buy so that I can help you try to like find the best brands and the best versions of those
Yeah.
that you're going to get the most bang for your buck, right? And that is so symbolic because it's about I talk about it in the book is that it's that personalization. Like let's live a life that's meaningful to us, and let's work towards the types of change that are meaningful for us. And when we create those change plans, let's make ones that actually like work for us, right? Like I'm constantly using the example of broccoli, right? Because I don't really like broccoli, and we all know everywhere out there you're supposed to eat broccoli, right? And so I say, I said, I don't need to eat broccoli. And any good that broccoli would do me is totally negated by, the pressure and the ickiness I would feel about having to eat it, right? So
Yeah.
it's not actually even going to do my body. But I can have cauliflower because I love cauliflower. And then I could just put some spinach in my shake to get the green because, there's evidence that green things are good for you, right? So let's include some green, but it doesn't have to be broccoli, right?
Yeah.
But by honoring myself and what I do and do like, and not making myself do things just because somebody else says it's good for me, like then I get to have like a whole different relationship with myself where, there's a lot more trust. I mean, people always, how do I build trust with myself? Stop making yourself do things you don't want to do, which isn't to say we can't figure out things that we do like to do to support our health. Like you were
Oh
saying,
yeah.
figuring out the movement piece, the exercise piece that you like, right? As opposed to doing something that's just prescribed to you by somebody else, right?
Yeah, definitely. Like it's so much easier to figure out what you don't like and what you don't want to do than and it's sometimes as simple as like the things that you want to do, the things that you like, just like fall into your lap. Like they just kind of. I think sometimes the moment you stop looking for these things is when they kind of like find their way into your life. And like for me personally, in terms of like a physical fitness way, like it always started off as running, but I hated running. I was always too big for it. Like, and I was like the pressure on my knees and things like that, and I just didn't like how it made me feel. And then I took up boxing, and yes, there's a lot of running involved in that, but there's all sorts of other things involved in that too, which I enjoyed. And then I went into weightlifting, enjoyed that, and you kind of, yeah, just these things that like maybe were like a fleeting thought one day or things like that. You kind of, yeah, like,
I
uh,
think though, I think though, really in terms of our life trajectory, I think those things actually come along when we just start to become a little bit open to it. When we start to just question, why am I doing things for other people's reasons,
yeah.
right? Like when we just have that little bit of openness. And I think for a lot of us, like we were so busy being there for other people, doing what other people said, and the concept, many of us didn't really have the freedom or the time to actually even get to spend time with ourselves to figure out what it was that we liked,
Hmm.
because I was watching your shows and I was doing what she told me to do at the gym and I was doing the, like, and my head was so full there wasn't even time to pause and stop and go like, oh, and you're right. Like it can be harder to know what you do like, I used to get bothered by those tests and it's like, what's your favorite color? And it's like, I don't know. And then I'd be like, I'm 40. How can I not know what my own favorite color is or book is or what, but you know what? I have a very strong sense of identity now
Yeah.
because I've had an opportunity to get to know. And you're right. Like just showing these things, they come into your life and we get to, I didn't discover strength training until my late 40s. And that was a big part of how I lost 80 pounds. And I love it. I just
Yeah.
got a trainer again recently, and it's the only place in my life where I do what I'm told and love it.
Yeah. Oh, I would totally agree. Totally agree. Like, it's something that you think you think you can do yourself, and you probably can, but also when you're told by somebody else and then you see how much it works, yeah, you're more than happy to be like, yeah, okay, yeah, I will happily let you tell me what to do. But you touched on a point earlier on that really really piqued me interest, and you mentioned how like particularly people who are like overly successful, high achievers, and they seem very very happy and content. That chances are that they aren't really in touch with themselves mentally or emotionally, and they're or they might not look after themselves in that way. Have you ever had anybody come to you, for coaching who hasn't really kind of found their kind of own emotional intelligence until much later on in life, and like, maybe they thought that it was never really a thing for them, but then all of a sudden change happened. And
Oh, yeah, yeah.
have you ever had that before?
Yeah, I absolutely have. And I mean, the roots of some of the people I've worked with that had a lot of their sense of self and identity what was tied up in their professional being, and
Hmm.
and work ethic. I actually think my marriage really ended because I went off at work to work on myself, and my wife, just she had such a work ethic. She was the one that you go into work no matter what. You could be as contagious as, like the bubonic plague, and you still go to work. and
Yeah.
and it was just a very big divide, but her entire identity was wrapped up in her professional self,
Mm.
which it had impacts on the relationship way beyond what I'm willing to talk about on the show. But
For sure.
but I have worked with clients who are like have gotten to the place with their careers where they can't do it anymore. They're burning out hard and fast, and they're having to face I worked with somebody who was doing that, and the at work they were just putting more and more pressure. That person was like just rising to the challenge of that pressure. Every other aspect of their life was just kind of falling away, and their father died, and then bam, yeah, all of a sudden things needed to change, right? And it was devastating to that person to actually have to take a leave from work,
Yeah.
and then there was an entirely new skill set required, to be learned to be able to go forward from there, right? And then
Hmm.
eventually, when that person did go back to work, they took they took that new everything that they had learned, with them. And it'd be cute because I used to every once in a while call in sick, and I would applaud them. I'm like, oh yeah. Or they'd call me and they let me know, like, you know what, I made a mistake at work today and I was okay with
Yeah. Oh, for
it.
sure. It's amazing what change does to somebody's perspective. And, obviously it's very heartbreaking what sometimes we have to go through to really kind of understand and see the perspective, really kind of see what we've been doing to ourselves this entire time. Like early in my career, I'd have like worked myself to the ground. And the change for me was whenever I noticed everybody around me progressing ahead of me in a shorter period of time. I kind of just went, okay, that kind of says it all. And been 10 years in, and right now, I'm still in the same career, by the way. Um, I am, in terms of my position, I feel actually probably more content than I have in such a long time because I have that acceptance. And it's like, sometimes you really kind of, when you sort of stop and take me, you really realize that there is more to life than just working for somebody else for just like, for what do you ever really get to show for it when you live like life like that? Like I don't feel like there's that much. And of
Yeah.
course, like and like that approach to life does work for a lot of people. And you know what? That's totally fine because you know
Does it
people.
really? I don't know.
I
Yeah.
you know
I know it really seems like it, but then,
yeah. I
I
think
have
some people are
a
so embedded in
yeah.
routine that it just works for them. And like, I kind of like, you know, I think when I started podcasting, really, like for me, I kind of like my perspective changed on things because it was very much a case of like, I found something that I love doing, that I was so different from anything I'd ever done before, like putting myself out there. Like, I'm very much an introverted person, but this is like the most extroverted thing I've ever done.
Oh wow.
But, I kind of realized it was like, yeah, I'm actually kind of, content in terms of what I'm doing for my career because it allows me to do this. And I
Mm.
kind of really learned like, you don't necessarily need to love what you do, but you need to kind of be at least very much content with it. And obviously you can find things that you love to do, but depending on your career, jobs are hard to kind of like the right job is kind of hard to come by unless you really go in
Yeah.
to do something for yourself, which is arguably even more difficult. Obviously, it really depends on like the kind of hand you're dealt, but a lot of people I do find do just kind of accept. But what I kind of find with that is you never really know what they truly kind of think about that, like, and sometimes you do see that. Like I kind of noticed it with a friend of mine where mental health never really been a thing for him. And then as soon as I noticed he was unsatisfied with his job, things like that, or he kind of was surrounded by more people who were more in touch with mental health, that's when the awareness kind of really crept up. Now, very, very good mental health, but more aware and more mindful of the things he needs to do to stay on top of it himself, because it's never
Yeah,
really been a
I'm
thing
a
he's
cautionary
acknowledged.
tale, right? Because I always aim, well, I mean, my parents had an attitude that mental health was kind of like an indulgence and a made up kind of thing, you know? And so I didn't ever really take it seriously, even though I was in counseling most of my life, right? And I had this
Mm-hmm.
dialectical view towards it. But I did actually learn the hard way because, I'd always bounced back from anything that had happened. And then when I snapped, like that, I call it breakdown. I literally kind of shattered into a lot of pieces, and that was the hard lesson, was that not prioritizing my mental health, allowing myself to stay in situations that were harming me. They were harming me way more than I knew,
Mm-hmm.
and the cost of it ended up being much greater than anything I ever would have predicted, you know?
Yeah.
So I had to, I'm one of those people who kind of learned the hard way that, like, wow, this is something that I need to prioritize and make sure, it's not that I don't have a little resilience and I can't, flex and take a few chances here and there, but the bottom line, it is something I need to be mindful of. And it is something that I need to find the whatever you want to call it, to make sure that I don't stay in situations that are not good for me for very long, because the consequences just they can be like but devastating, right? And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people too, they have, and I see this a lot in my older clients and stuff like that there starts to be a reckoning, and things that they had thought that they had resolved and they'd really just shoved under the carpet. And it sort of has this habit, it seems, as we get older, of coming back out, and
Yeah.
hopefully we're have the security and the stability and the safety around us to be able to kind of like, move through that and work with it. I mean, personally, my own history with that, I wouldn't wish that on anybody, because I don't know. It's been one of the most beautiful things to bear witness to the things I have been through, and it's been one of the most difficult things that I, have ever done as well, right? But
Yeah.
it's where I've found myself, and it's where I've um, ignoring ourselves, trying to get rid of ourselves, trying to fix ourselves, trying to eliminate things about ourselves. That's sort of the way we were all kind of taught to become the person that we thought we should be, but if you really think about those things, it's not really surprising that all of those lead to bad mental health or internal chaos, and my discovery after the breakdown is certainly that the real healing, I don't want to use the word, that meaningful healing for me has been about an integration. It has been about actually meeting all of those different parts, all of that stuff that I felt was problematic or undesirable or uncomfortable or just plain out terrifying, and meeting it all with unconditional love, right? So I sort of have I do a internal family systems work, but so we all sit around at the table and everybody gets to have a voice, and it's my job to be like, loving towards everybody, but I still got to be the one that makes the decisions and drive the bus, right?
Yeah.
But they can, but it's the funny thing is the first real peace in my entire life has come from being in relationship to all of those parts rather than trying to get rid of them. And now that I know that, it's hilarious to me, because it's like, of course, like if I was trying to get rid of a part of me, it's gonna fight back, right? It's like
Yeah.
that's gonna create internal chaos, right? Whereas when we can sit down, we can work it out, and we can go like, okay, you can have fish and chips once a month, and then like, but I'm not gonna make you eat broccoli, because I hear you on that one.
Yeah, I honestly like I completely hear what you're saying because I find with myself and with others that there's this sort of like residual impact or residual damage that the certain experiences can have that I think get completely overlooked. So you go through a pretty dark period, and then another change happens, but for the better. But everything, because you feel good, you have that like instant hit of like serotonin that you push everything out. Why you were feeling so bad in the first place, like you said, everything gets swept under the rug. And and the unfortunate side to that is when it comes back, it hits you harder, and literally you're kind of still left asking why. And then you kind of almost get to the point where you're almost like forced to really kind of sit and understand why, because the harder it keeps hitting you, the more you're eventually just asking yourself, well, why is this? Like, I thought I was fine. Like, I've noticed this with people who were in relationships for too long, in the same job for too long, and they come out of it and you think, okay, new lease of life. But then you really have to take they really have to take a second to be like, okay, I've just had a pretty, rough time of it over this last while. Am I okay with everything that's just happened? Because just because a particular situation or a particular person or whatever it may be, circumstance is no longer in your life, doesn't mean that it wasn't a part of it. You still have to accept the fact that it was. You have to accept what it's done. And you have to really kind of be at peace with the fact that, yes, it was not nice, but it's happened. It's been able to shape you. And it's really been a conduit for you to be able to move on and be better,
Yeah,
and
as
at
a
least come away with more of an understanding as to circumstance and situations.
Yeah, I was often one to put like, it's like, and I prided myself on this fact. Like I make the best out of situations. All right,
Mhm.
okay, that really sucked. That was horrible. Let's move on, right? Like let's not let that define us. Let's not let that stop us. Let's not do, and I move on. But I didn't really ever deal with it, and
Yeah.
so it did build up, and eventually, that stuff. You're right. So now I'm actually at a juxtaposition in my life where I've just lost somebody incredibly meaningful to me, you know, um,
I'm
not for
sorry to hear
bad
that.
reasons or anything like that. Yeah, well, but this is the thing, like at the very same time that this one person has needed to leave my life, it's been done on a good footing, with love, but it's a very conclusive ending.
Yep.
And then like I kind of pivoted and ended up back at school. And I also, I met this other pretty cool person at the same time, entirely different kind of relationship or whatever. But like there's all these doors opening up, and younger me would have just like actually taken the pain of the loss, right? And just like put it way over there because I've got like let's just focus on all these other great things happening. But I've learned, and there's a new wisdom to me now that says like, no, no, I'm gonna make sure I stay connected to this grief and actually feel it.
Mhm.
It's kind of ironic that the work I did the last 8 years opened up my heart so much that I get to feel this at just supernova kind of levels, right? But I wouldn't trade that for the gifts that relationship provided, right?
Yeah, of
And
course.
even the reconnection to the joy about these other things about my life. But I now have this understanding of the symbiosis between these things, that it's the moon and the sun, and they are part of the same system, right? And so in the past I used to try to really hold on to the good stuff and kind of like, hurry the more difficult stuff along, right? And now I'm just like, no, 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 they're part of the same cycle, and I do myself a favor, my present self and my future self a favor by making space for both of them. And
Yep.
that's dialectics. That's being both are true. And I don't when I'm grieving sometimes lately, I mean, it's bad. You would think, but it does pass.
Oh
I do
yeah.
get up and wash off my face, and then I start to work on whatever project I have going, and I get focused, and I have these magic moments and great things happen, and then the grief comes again, and it's yeah, and the learning how to not fight that the learning how to hold myself with compassion throughout that, it doesn't make bad things not happen. It
No.
doesn't make difficult feelings go away, but it stops adding all those other layers of making it so much harder on ourselves, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. It really just kind of shapes your perspective on going into things, and really kind of, your sort of your mindfulness and understanding about like how you can deal with certain things. Like, and kind of everybody who's like been through a lot of things, at least coping mechanisms. You kind of, you might have the biggest anxiety in the world going to show up for something, but like, of course, with enough practice, how you are going to deal with things. A lot of the time it is just head on. And the fear that you might have about certain things is shaped by your past experiences. But again, that's more just a sort of, it just adds to the kind of understanding that you have with yourself and your experiences, and just accepting that it's happened. um, I did actually also wanted to. I know we've chatted for nearly an hour, haven't touched on this yet, but
Yeah.
I wanted to touch on your books as well, because obviously you've been an author. You've written your books From Pressure to Path, Ways to Shut Up for Yourself, and The Light Switch Myth. I wanted to talk about them as well. So, at what point did within your journey, did you think, okay, I need to put pen to paper here. I need to take my experiences, put them on a
Yeah, that
page, and
was
I
that
need
was an
to.
actual moment, right? Like a lot of things, people ask me, what was the defining moment? And I'm like, it wasn't a moment, it was like years. But that was actually, I came home, I driving home, I was thinking about it, and I came home and from another coaching session with another client, and I had been describing the concept of change not being, because they were stuck in the same cycle of very high expectations and beating themselves up because it didn't happen overnight, and like I think we'd actually set the goal of drinking water in the morning 2 times during the week. They had changed the goal behind my back to going to do it every day, 3 times a day. It didn't happen. And they were right back, just like beating themselves up and feeling terrible. And so again, I like to speak in metaphor because I find it really helpful. We've learned constructs. So metaphors are how I come in and meet a preconceived construct about things, and we all have preconceived constructs about how change is created. So I was again explaining the light switch myth that like it's not an instant thing. It takes practice. It takes time. It's better to start small, little tiny steps, and get stable with each little incremental change, and then build on that. And I got home and I was just thinking about my kind of most of my life, my own experience, and all the people I had coached, and even the people that I run into that I have convers. This is universal. I know I do know some people that that don't have that kind of thinking in some areas of their life, but it still shows up in somewhere else, right? It's
Yeah, for
just like
sure.
that kind of perfectionism. It should be instant. I should be over. I should know this by now. I'm not even entitled to help because I read a book about it. I know about it. I should be able to do it kind of thinking, right? So somehow it always sneaks up in some areas of our lives, even for those people that really sort of have their stuff together. So I was like, this is universal, and as an organic coach that's not willing to do sensationalist kind of selling or any of that kind of thing, it can be a little bit difficult to get myself in front of people, right? I do have people come into my life that I get to work with, and different opportunities show up the way that I do it. But I just thought it would be really nice to share some of what I've learned. Because I also know a lot of people. I know a lot of people who won't go to therapy, and they won't allow themselves any help, like whether it's a coach or whatever. They just that meant that it's a traumatic independence, to think that you need to do everything on your own, right? And I didn't know that either, and I was one of those persons. So I thought I'll write a book and I'll put it out there into the universe, and then maybe it'll find some more people to be able to kind of help them, and the me being in the trenches, kind of learning this the hard way. Maybe I know many of us still have to learn it the hard way, but I thought maybe I could just kind of share like all this therapeutic, very contemporary kind of stuff, like how I applied it to my life, how it actually worked, how I put those pieces together, the things that I learned and derived out of it. And I could share it with other people, and maybe I might be able to reach more people doing it that way, right?
Yeah, of course. And I think it's certainly something important, especially given the topics. You're talking about experiences as well, because, you know, I think for a start, like, you never really know if other people have had the same or similar experiences. And like sometimes people are waiting to kind of hear about that because a lot of the time, I think when people feel so isolated in their own heads, they, every so often there might be the feeling it's like, I feel like I'm the only person in the world who feels this way. So then there's like this massive sense of relief that people get when they're like, oh, wow, someone else feels this way too. Someone else experienced
Mm.
this too, or at least something similar. Like, you know, empathy is one of the strongest things I think, you could really, really have. And it's sort of, it really can be like a massive step for somebody as soon as they realize that they're not alone. Because even though, like, I mean, it's very easy to say, oh, yeah, you're not alone. But, try telling that to the voice inside somebody's head. You
It's
know what I
it's really
mean?
interesting doing the coaching, because people time and time and again are kind of surprised that I've been there, you know. And it's like
Yeah.
when I think one of my more recent clients is like I'm trying to, I run into this one a lot with people, right? When I try to explain that compassion can actually be more motivating than the crack of the whip, come down hard on yourself, right? And they're convinced if they ease up on themselves, that's it, game over, on the couch, bonbons forever, right? You know. And I'm just like, I get it, because I literally have a bit of a photographic memory, and I remember I was standing in my living room looking outside, and I'd been learning about all this stuff, and Christian Neff's compassion, and there's all this research coming out that compassion actually works as a better motivator, and
Hmm.
and I just thought, oh, well, I really have not been getting very far doing it my way. And it's actually been pretty darn painful and difficult and stuff like that. So maybe I'll do an experiment. Maybe I'll just try this, right? And it took me a while to get the hang of it or whatever. And then I was like, oh my gosh. Oh my gosh, this does work. This does work better. It's like, again, it doesn't make all the problems go away. It doesn't mean that, like, some things aren't hard. They are hard, but like, as a motivator, I started me being kind to myself, me being supportive to myself, me actually listening, me meeting myself in the moment, all those kinds of strategies. All of a sudden, the inner me started responding to myself like entirely different. Like, oh yeah, let's try that again. Oh, really? I really like, okay, I'm not so scared to try that, or I'm not so scared of making a mistake in front of you, or I'm not so scared again. I'm maybe, like, yeah, you know what? That I really liked how you were treating and talking to me about that. So I'm like, let's do it again, right? And
Yeah.
it started to snowball, and I guess the best description I have for it was the all these things that I was trying to create change, because I was really going from like bottom level functioning to just even trying to get the basic level of functioning, and it all started to get a lot easier, and it started to build momentum, and I actually started to enjoy myself in the process. And
Hmm.
that's what I keep trying to bottle and share with other people, right? But I meet so many clients, and they're like, that won't work. I don't believe you. I'm like, I hear you. I've been there. I get it.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. I think, when people are kind of going through that thing, going through the sort of, ringer of mental health for the first time, I think everybody's a cynic. They, I think it's the sort of thing where people don't want to be told, or at least feel like they're being told how to feel. Because even though that's not what's happening, I think there's an element where, when you open up to somebody, and especially if it's your first time, your guard is up and it's never been higher. So like every single thing you might hear, might feel like an attack. And even the
Yeah.
compassion side of it, it's very much kind of like, why are you doing this to me? Why are you telling me nice things? It's not true. I don't believe this. And then it's just like, but then it's sort of, that's the sort of thing, where you
Yeah, when I say I'm like trauma informed, it's actually trauma aware because that tends to be a clinical term. But like one of the big key components to that is that if you tell me what to do, all I feel is more pressure. I've
Yeah.
been I've been being told what to do my entire life. It's barely ever, ever, ever been a fit. It actually 90% of the time just makes me feel a lot worse about myself because what's wrong with me that doesn't work. So telling me what to do, like even though I've been that person that said, please tell me what to do. Right? Please wave your magic wand. Do you
Yeah.
have the answer? I haven't been able to find the answer. But the real honoring of my soul and was when somebody wouldn't tell me what to do, and where they met me and help give me information so I could figure out what I wanted to do and how I was going to do it, and to give me that real choice. Because but in that we do need to learn to how to talk and relate to ourselves differently. Otherwise we continue to be that externalized person who's shaming and blaming and guilt and pressuring, like, and doing all those strategies that make everything so much heavier and harder to do.
Yeah, and that's it. And usually, whenever you have that kind of like outlook, everything's all externalized, chances are you haven't caught up with yourself internally and really kind of touch base and made sure that you know you're okay yourself. And I think like we were saying before, like sort of self-acceptance is one of the most important things I think we have as people, but like it's really kind of slept on with a lot of people. And sometimes maybe people are kind of accepting themselves for less than what they actually are. And it it's, but yeah, it's sort of the reasons that kind of people do feel like that. Like it's just it's heartbreaking. Like I think, what I mean, it's
Yeah.
like you say, you would never wish anybody to kind of go through the things that people do. And the perspectives people have is very interesting as well, because I think one of the first sort of for me personally, one of like the first sort of signs of perspective I ever had that really kind of changed things for me was, when you sort of realize that not two different problems carry different weights for different people. Like you could have the worst thing, and arguing the worst thing in the world could happen to you, but the next person, something arguably less has happened to them, but the feelings of grief or the feelings of trauma are still the same. That's not something that can be helped, and that doesn't necessarily minimize it for either person. It's really because situations are situations, no matter what way you look at it. But
I
how
think
you
that
feel
ties.
is that's a whole different thing altogether.
Maybe you found the magic way for us to end this conversation that's probably wants to go for another 12 hours is um, right at the beginning you talked about comparing, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a trite thing, and I don't often go for trite things, but I heard the saying compare and despair, so pretty much for I don't know at least 8 years now. When I start to notice that comparing thing, this little voice comes compare and despair. So I'm like, okay, maybe I don't want to do that, right? And I use the metaphor of a ruler. I'm like, whose ruler are you using there, Charisma? Right? Who's ruler? And I do want to say to your listeners, whoever's out there listening, you and me have had we're both obviously in a place of a lot of self-awareness, but when I'm talking about these things, I just want to be very careful for you to understand that none of this happens through a decision. Just exactly what I'm saying in the book. None of it is just you should know because you heard us talk about it, or you should know how to do this because you have some resources around it. Almost everything we're talking about actually takes time. It takes practice. Awareness is this beautiful birthplace of growth. It's often a very, very difficult one because to become aware is when we really are facing things that make us very uncomfortable, or bringing us face to face to things that have caused us struggle or pain or other things. There's often very good reasons why we've left things out of our awareness. So, although awareness is such a powerful, potent place for growth and healing and change, it's a difficult one too. So
Yeah.
I always encourage people to be a little gentle with yourself. But even if you have tiny seeds of awareness, that is a start. But again, it's not going to be an instant transformation. It's going to be a slow, gradual moving towards where you want to get with practice. And it doesn't have to be 100% of the time. It does not have to be perfect. Perfect is actually impossible. It's actually much better if you're just doing it at a rate that is sustainable.
Exactly. As people, all we can be is perfectly imperfect, or imperfectly perfect, whatever way you want to look at it. And, on the point of awareness, it is difficult. You have to, because it's not just about being aware of how you feel in a certain moment, but also being aware of your surroundings, being aware of your experiences, being aware of how things have made you feel in the past, being aware of your traumas, being aware of a lot of things that you might not want to have to face again. But the moment you do, honestly, it alleviates a lot more than you might think. But Kerisma, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on Behind the Camera podcast. Thank you so much for your time. It's been a very, very lovely conversation. I really, really, really enjoyed this one. I would just like to give you the floor just before we wrap up, just for you to let the listeners know where they can find you and your books.
Okay, please come to towardswellness.ca and sign up for the newsletter. The website itself is a few months unupdated because I'm being perfectly human and went back to school and haven't had a chance to do it. But there's books on there, there's coaching, I have an accessibility policy. You can always get the books for free if you can't afford to buy them. But sign up for the newsletter. Let me see a little thing in my inbox that says, "Oh, somebody signed up for my newsletter." I send it out once a month maximum, but I would be able to say, "Oh, my website is updated," so you can. But you're also you can Google my name, and I'm out there on socials, and I'm not hoity-toity in any sense. If you find any way to connect with me, I'm happy to connect back. If it's at 2 o'clock in the morning, you might not hear from me till the next day, but because I have a little bit of boundaries around my timing. But I always enjoy connecting with listeners and fellow people along the road. The road or the path? The path. It's a path. I better call it a path. Right? It's a path. The path to change. So
Yeah.
yes. Don't forget to hit like on Andy's podcast here. He's got something really great going here.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I do appreciate your time and the conversation. So once again, Kerisma, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And there you have it for episode 126 of Behind the Camera. Massive thank you to Kerisma Vere for being today's guest and for such a fun and enjoyable open conversation. You can find Kerisma's coaching services at towardswellness.ca and her books at kerismavere.com. Links in the episode description. And of course, if you'd like to stay connected with Behind the Camera, you can check out my Linktree in the description for all socials and for my book, Behind the Camera, The Journey So Far. Once again, thank you for listening, for the support, and for being part of the journey. Until next time, take care, stay creative, and I'll see you soon. But until then, peace.